Today we interview Denise Joi, a pilot for Colorado Parks and Wildlife, who was featured in the short film Fight or Flight. She flies a small Cessna to help count and transport wildlife and stock fish at remote lakes. It's a beautiful, dangerous gig. We talked with Denise about the difficulty of flying in the mountains, assessing weather and calculating risk, same as people on foot might do in the mountains, except the stakes for her are so much higher. We also talk about her past traumas and how pursuing aviation has helped her heal. The film is beautiful. It's available to watch for free on Vimeo. We'll link it in the show notes. This conversation was fascinating, and I hope you enjoy.
Hey, hello. I am Stephen Casimiro. C'est moi, and avec moi is Justin Hausman, my co-host.
I'm not going to say anything in French. No French from me today.
Justin lived, how long did you live in Paris?
I don't know, like 6 or 8 months, something like that.
Long
Maybe
enough
longer.
that you should have a few words beyond baguette and fromage, but whatever.
Je ne comprends pas français.
There we
go.
go.
I don't understand any French.
Okay, well, neither do I. So, we're both very excited today to talk to Denise Joi, who is one of the 4 and only 4 pilots working for the state of Colorado. She's going to correct me on the division shortly. She and her colleagues fly over this absolutely gorgeous state on a regular basis, and they monitor wildlife and they stock lakes and ponds with fish and do all kinds of amazing stuff. So while you're sitting there in your cubicle like Justin and me, Denise is up there wingtip to wingtip over the Rocky Mountains all year round. So it's a very exciting job, and I can't wait to hear more about it. Denise, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited.
So Denise and I first got connected through a film that was produced by a wonderful production outfit called Gnarly Bay, who did a profile video of her called Fight or Flight. And man, the cinematography is just the opening where, like, wait, where's the plane? You're flying over the mountains, and it's just gorgeous. So Denise, tell us about this film and how it came about, and then we're going to guide you through your backstory, and then we're going to get right to this amazing job that you have.
Sounds good. Thank you again for having me. So the film, I might actually answer this question with a question, because I feel like, how long have you had Adventure Journal? I feel like I should know this. I should have done my homework, but...
Well, the earliest iteration of it was in 2008. Then it kind of became bigger in 2010. And then our first issue in print came out in 2016.
Wow. So I feel like, would you agree, sometimes you start a project and why you start it in the beginning sort of evolves, right? And
Absolutely.
now you would probably answer a different answer than you would have when you began. And for me, the film has evolved. It was a 14-minute film, and it took 4 or 5 years for it to come to light. So I felt it was a process. It was such an amazing learning process. Originally, quickly, I really wanted to make a film about what I did for a living. Just the images, that you see in the film are fantastic. I wanted to showcase the female pilot aspect as well, lifting other female aviators into the industry. But that was really just kind of the beginning. I hike to the alpine lakes after I stock them. I've been to almost 100 now. Actually, I've been to over 100 alpine lakes after I stock them with fish. We stock over 400 lakes. And so it was really a surface level story when we began. But over the course of learning Lindsay Hagen as a director, building a trust with her, there's always the real reason behind a story. There's always that sort of below the surface level of why you have a job. And I was at first really afraid to talk about those things, and was really curious why. I feel like once I was able to have that vulnerability and share that part, that's where the real story was. And I think the biggest thing is, we connect through stories. So much in aviation, we use storytelling as lessons to be learned. Pilots making mistakes, or pilots triumphing things or learning things. And so there's a lot of storytelling in our industry as well, in aviation. But I think as a storytelling aspect, we connect through stories and we heal through stories. So there is those reasons too. I think whenever you have something important in your life, you have these really big, impactful things in your life, I feel like rarely does it have one answer, you know? And so for me, it's a lot of answers on that, for sure.
So just real quickly, just for formality, who's your employer?
Colorado Parks and Wildlife. I didn't correct you. It used to be Division of Wildlife.
I was waiting. I gave you that. I put it there on a plate for you.
I know, but then we had to like sound check there for a second, so I got distracted. Yeah, Colorado Parks and Wildlife. There are 4 pilots and 4 planes, and we used to be more regionalized where we were located and the operations that we worked on. But now we're all over the state, which is great because the southwest part of the state's really pretty. So I'm really happy to be doing that. But I will say I do have a lot of cubicle time for all those people who are envious of my wingtip to wingtip. Yeah, I have a lot of paperwork and cubicle time as a pilot, for sure.
Yeah, but your field work. So, okay, so you are one of the four pilots in this amazing job working for this really cool sounding department. How did you come to Colorado? You were a pilot in Alaska. Tell us a bit about your path. And then I know Jess and I are both kind of sitting on the edge of our seats wanting to ask about being in the air and all that. But let's learn a little bit, learn a little bit more about you first.
Sure. I'm from New Hampshire originally, and I started to fly there in Maine. And it was a long story. I bopped around Florida and Alaska to get my first ratings, and finally went to Colorado to finish up all my ratings, just because the weather was a lot better than Alaska. That's the short, simple answer. That's the 8-year condensed into.
Did you know that you were? Did you know when you started that you wanted to be? I mean, maybe you didn't envision like working for like a wildlife or a state, national park, state park, whatever we're calling that sort of thing, a governmental organization. But did you anticipate that you'd be doing something in the backcountry, or were you just trying to fly? Like, were you just hoping for any kind of flight job?
I always knew I wanted to fly in the backcountry. I always knew I wanted to fly in Alaska. And I don't know where I got that from, because I just never read any Jack London books or anything. So I think, we'll talk about this. I think you want to talk about this a little bit more later, but flying is a lot of freedom and escapism. And I think for me as a child, you think of the last frontier, you think of just the wilderness. And I loved being in the wild in New England, but I really wanted that untouched wilderness, and I wanted to experience that. And so I never knew. So I guess you could classify my job as a natural resource position. There's very few of us anymore. Yeah, you bet.
I'm stumbling around, but that was what I was working for.
There's not many of us. Most pilots that were a natural resource are at law enforcement, or they're a biologist / pilot in Alaska. There are some Park Service pilots in Alaska. There's very few Department of Natural Resources, or for us, it's Department of Natural Resource, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, that have just a pilot. Usually you're dual rolled. So law enforcement.
Is it declining?
Pilot.
Did it used to be you had more people in that role?
You used to have more people in the role because we didn't have the technologies. We really started, I would say across the board, I don't know the history very much, the 50s and the 60s, we saw a lot of aerial support with what we do. Now with GPS collars, we're not using VHF anymore. Now with like imaging and really GPS is like really kind of paved the way. But and just honestly, finding pilots that have that skill set too, is getting challenging. But a lot of it is technology changes. So they typically do the dual jobs, or a lot of folks are in firefighting. So I have a lot of girlfriends who are flying for that, helicopters and big scoops. And so this job, I didn't even know existed when I started, I guess is the long answer. So when I went to Alaska, that's where I was actually flying in Denali, and was actually flying a bunch of tourists over Denali to do like just a basic tour flight. And off my left-hand shoulder, I still remember the day, there was a Park Service pilot doing a low-level survey over some doll sheep on a mountain sort of ridge. And I just took one look at that. Wow. And I said, that's amazing. I want to do that, because I had such a huge affinity and connection with wildlife management and conservation already, and just to combine them was a dream. I don't have a degree in biology. I have a degree in aviation science. So it was hard. It was kind of one of those jobs where you need the experience, right, before you get the job, but you don't really get it until you have the job. So I did a lot of volunteer work after Alaska. I went over to Central America, working with Pantera, a great group, tracking jaguars, worked with their government for macaw bird migrations. And then I went to Africa to try to get into some wildlife conservation places there. And that's when I got the call that Colorado Parks and Wildlife was hiring, and hopped on it. So that was 14
What year was
years
that?
ago. That was
14.
2014. That was 9 years ago. Let me do my math. So this is my 2000. Yep. So there we go. But anyway, so that was kind of a roundabout answer. I was in New Hampshire. I came to Colorado in 2006 to finish my ratings, and then I was here for 2 years, and then I went to Alaska. So that was sort of.
Do you
my
have to
track,
get
too.
rated or certified in different states, or is it like why did you need to go to Colorado to do that?
I wanted to learn how to fly in the mountains. I always wanted to. So when I went to Alaska, I was flying. I got my tailwheel endorsement there, my seaplane rating endorsement. But ever since I was in New Hampshire, I always wanted to fly in the mountains. And
Where'd you grow up in New Hampshire? What part?
Seacoast area. We moved a lot. We moved 26 times before high school.
Oh my God.
We had a lot of housing.
My God.
Yeah.
All around New England or all in New Hampshire? Or?
New Hampshire, Maine, Florida. Kind of bopped around quite a bit. So you don't know. You can get your ratings Part 61 at a local FBO, a little tiny flight base operator at some little airport. You can do it Part 141, go to a school, go to university. There's a lot of different routes you can take, and you can, move around. So
I've never really considered, other than when I was a kid and fell in love with Top Gun and would go hang around the like Navy recruiting offices, this is a true story, and just kind of at like 10 and just like badger them all day long, and do pull-ups on their things that they had in there to stay in shape. I never really thought about becoming a pilot myself other than that, but I have very vivid memories of 3 different times in my life, working out of whether as a student or, for the last 15 years, like working remotely, like out of a coffee shop somewhere. And I've seen 3 different people studying for, I can tell that they're studying for some sort of pilot's license. Like I can see their binder open and they're jotting notes down. And every time I'm like, God, that's cool. what a cool thing to be doing. And I have a buddy who used to fly helicopters for, I don't think he was doing fire stuff, but maybe a little bit. And every once in a while we'll see a helicopter fly by and he'll be like, I can fly that. I'll be like, it's just such a...
Justin's also obsessed with military aircraft, right?
That's true. Yeah, that is true.
When Fleet Week comes to the Bay Area.
I get so jazzed for that. It's true. I build model airplanes in my spare time too. It's fun.
Oh, I love it. That is such a pilot thing to say, though. I can fly that.
Oh, it's a pilot thing. I nod like I would know what a pilot thing is. But I want to know what a pilot thing is.
There's a lot of pilot things.
So
There's a lot of pilot jokes, too. There's a lot of bad pilot jokes.
Yeah.
Are you going to
we'll
tell
have
us
a special segment later on.
There's a couple that are... There's a PG-13 ones. There's how do you know as a pilot at a party? I'll tell you.
Because
They'll
I
tell you.
They'll tell you.
It's like a professional skier.
Which actually, I rarely tell people that I fly because I don't want to talk
You
about
don't
it for
want
half
to deal
an
with
hour.
the gawking and the questions. Yeah, like this.
And I know I'm not trying to sound like, I don't want. Oh my gosh, that sounded so not like an ego thing, but just like
She's so cool and she knows it.
We probably had that
No,
conversation 8
no.
million times.
I just like to not. For parties, I am that person that ghosts very, like, I will have a party and I'll say hi to people, and then I'm that person that won't say goodbye to you. Like, I am that person at a party. So maybe it's not necessarily I don't want to tell you that I'm a pilot, but maybe I just don't like house parties. But, okay, the other one is...
You made a whole movie about being a pilot, so you obviously like telling people about being a pilot.
No, and that's actually the funniest thing, because I'm such a private person. Like, I have a private Instagram account. I think I posted like 40 things. It was the strangest thing, this process. It really put me it was a really healing journey in a lot of ways. How do I talk about this? What do I talk about? Those are just, yeah. I grew a lot through the process, for sure.
Yeah, let's talk about the job. I want to hear these pilot jokes, but I want to hear more about, like, okay, so you do have cubicle time, but when you don't have cubicle time, what does it look like? What are you doing?
I think in the film, it really shows the aspects quickly of the tracking that we do and the surveys that we do. The film really just explores a lot on the how we, I guess, spawn our fish and drop them into high alpine lakes. But quickly, I mean, we survey, we track, we transport wildlife. That could be big game, smaller conservation species, avian species, waterfowl surveys. I think it's over 900 species that we manage in the state of Colorado. And so I fly on a daily basis for different projects. It's pulses of work throughout the year. So it's really diverse. I mean, it changes throughout the year depending on when we fly our different surveys, and each animal is different. The winter is mostly our waterfowl surveys in January, and then we come up into nesting surveys in the spring. We do our capture work, so the helicopter captures the wildlife, and then we fly over support for that. In the spring and summer, we do our surveys for pronghorn. In the fall, we do the fish drops, and then in the winter, we do our big game surveys, and that's counting for the big game. Is pretty, you just fly grids, and you're looking at the how healthy the population groups are, looking at how many, males, females, babies, depending on the species. And they put that all through modules. The biologist puts those all through modules and, determines how many hunting licenses they're going to derive from certain game management units. So on a daily basis, when I'm not flying alone, I fly alone for the aerial fish stocking because it's so high risk. But every other time I'm flying with the biologist who's doing that survey for that area. And there's a lot that I work with. There's a lot of biologists.
So you're not doing the spotting at the same time the biologist is, because it's wondering how you fly in. So, and did you fly a Cessna 185, right, for the fish stocking? Do you fly the same craft for everything?
Yes. So they're all Cessna 185s. And they all I could just hop into any, they all fly the same. And there's a little differences, right? Every car has a little differences, but yeah, so we all can fly each other's aircraft, and we do that. So, but we all fly with an observer. Our main priority is flying the aircraft because we're flying so low to the ground, and we fly under an FAA low-level waiver. If you're just a private pilot or commercial pilot, you have really strict distances from the ground, from people, from cities, for good reason. So we actually have a waiver that we get so that we can do those surveys at a lower altitude. And yeah, so our job is to fly the airplane and to go home. So no matter what I do on a daily basis, counting the animals is not my main job. My main job is bringing everybody home. So I really, that's really where I keep my biggest focus.
Do you have, are you usually flying with biologists who are doing this all the time too? Like, that are just as knowledgeable as you are in terms of like what they're looking at from above and like where the animals might be? Or do you kind of know, like, do you have little tricks? Be like, well, you know what? I bet if we like kind of buzz over here, we'll like kind of come around the corner, we'll see these ones or something like that. I mean, are you working with the biologist in terms of how you're able to track them, or are you really just kind of being directed by the biologist?
Working, when you begin, you're getting taught a lot. But now that I've been here for 9 years, we're colleagues, and we definitely have different roles, and those roles are really identified and known in the cockpit. Like, what are your duties? What are my duties? But yeah, they become your friends, become your family. I've been flying with these people for 10 years, and they have kids and their lives change, or they lose their parents, or so you get to know these people really well, but they know their animals very well. They know like where they're hanging out. And so, but then, we're both really good at spotting animals from the air, which not a lot of people are. So sometimes we'll get a new hire, like a technician or someone come in, and that's fine. It just takes a while to get used to like what you're looking at on the landscape, because we're going between 90 and 120 miles an hour sometimes. So, it's fast. So, you know, you don't really have much time to sort of pick things up over the landscape when they're so tiny.
So you mentioned that you like to hike up to the lakes, or you visited all the lakes that you've done fish drops at. I mean, does this? I'm assuming that means you like spending time in the backcountry. But does this, experience of being airborne and seeing everything from above, does this sort of change your relationship with that space? I mean, does it, either complicate your understanding of what a mountain system is like, or do you feel like you know the place better because you've seen it from above versus just like hiking around and stuff like that?
100%. The best advice I got learning backcountry in Alaska was a bush pilot, and he said the best thing to do is to hike where you want to be, where you want to land. Especially when you're like landing on unimproved airstrips, because boulder, what looks like gravel to you might be boulders, or, the wetness of the sand, are my tires going to stick in that? Am I going to flip over? There's so much microclimates in the mountains. So you have different cirques and different sides that are interacting really differently depending on how that weather system is coming through. And as a pilot, you become a meteorologist, not like a professional one, but you understand how to read weather, and especially weather through Colorado. And when I first started doing the cirques, I went up there because you don't have a lot of time when you're flying. You can circle, but there really is something to be said about going up to the cirques and sitting there and seeing how that wind is interacting in that cirque. How is it, is it what a rotor is going to look like? And you can tell what a rotor looks like because you can look at the lake. You can see the sort of wind movement on the lake if there's a rotor inside. But just, where are the downdrafts going to be on the edge, and how would I fly this? You really can stand there and look at where you want to be. Sometimes it can be tricky, while you're flying. But when I'm flying those, I never feel rushed, and I never feel like I have to get that job done. So the further you get into that cirque, the less options you have. And I almost think of it too for your audiences, like what it's like being a climber, just you're looking at this huge, canvas and realizing like how many pitches you have and how much, where you're going to be at a certain point, and am I going to have enough energy when I get there to finish the job, or if I get injured, or for me, if I lose an engine, for you, if you get injured, how am I going to fall? Where am I going to fall? I feel like there's a lot of similarities between, I guess, your climbing audience and my sort of mountain flying audience. That sort of that high level awareness on that big picture is really similar. You're looking at each point. What if something bad happens, and what am I going to do? And where are my outs in that situation? And being there on foot as a hiker really helps, I think, for sure.
So to ground this for people who are trying to envision this, first off, the film, again, it's by Gnarly Bay, Fight or Flight. It's on Vimeo, so it's easy enough for you it's free, so it's easy enough to take a look at it. But to envision what Denise is talking about here, so you can imagine a cirque as like a bowl or an open bowl, and at the bottom of this, when she's doing, I think you're talking about the fish stocking,
right.
These lakes that she's coming in at, you're coming in kind of from the high side, right? And then imagine like an ice cream scoop is sort of taken out part of the mountain and with the lake. And so tell us about how you have to approach that and what you're doing and when you release the fish. Like, what are the mechanics of that? And you're coming into this basin where the winds can be quite complicated. What does all that look like for you? What's going through your head?
I think it's a long process. I think, the process starts the night before when we're looking at weather. We're looking at how, upper level winds, low level winds. Actually, the fire weather sites are a really great site to look at on NOAA. They give, just that 5 foot level wind, the gusting factor there, sort of the transport winds, the sort of medium level winds and the high level winds, and just because they're going to react, winds and mountains react differently from the peak to the base, right? And so I'm looking at sort of a high level weather forecast. Then when we go up, before we even pick the fish, sometimes we'll go up to the mountains and we'll fly right over them, see what the winds are doing right over the lakes. You can see wind traveling over water, for those not familiar, by the way that it ripples. So the direction that it's going, the speed that it's going, and those are really important when you're flying in the mountains, because in the morning you have those drainage winds, right? Those winds come down the mountain. And if you see sort of wind patterns on that lake in that cirque that are reverse. That can be an indication of a rotor. You're also looking at the downdrafts, how strong the winds are on the lake. But so there's a lot of things you look at as a mountain pilot. Once we kind of go to the mountains, before we even stock up, we do what's called a wind turn, where, I mean, there's forecasting sensors that are throughout Colorado, Monarch Pass, Copper Pass, Berthoud Pass. But again, every mountain region, every little cirque is going to be so different. So we do a wind turn right above those mountains. And that's just a constant rate, 360-degree turn to see what's my ground speed. Where am I getting pushed, right? How is the aircraft actually getting pushed in the winds over those mountains in that moment? And then we'll make our go, no go decision right then and there before we load the fish. We'll be like, today's not a great day. The winds are too strong. Or, we're seeing some really good winds here. We're seeing some really good weather. And then we'll land at the airport, whether that's Salida, Rifle, Montrose. There's different locations that we use. And the hatchery folks are right there set up. We load the fish up. There's a big metal pod, square pod on the inside of the aircraft. All the seats get taken out. And there's a hopper. There's an opening in the bottom of the aircraft. So you can imagine this square cube inside the plane, a cylinder hopper, sort of like a straw on the bottom where the fish would come out. And you have 9 tubes inside that square tank. So you can do 9 lakes. You can stock 9 lakes for every flight. And each of those tubes is 3 to 5 gallons of water. We carry oxygen, so we can oxygenate the fish. So we make sure that's operating, so they're alive, they're healthy during the transport. And I can speed this process along too. I can make this faster. But we load the fish.
It's fascinating.
Yeah.
What kind of fish is this, real quick? Sorry.
Different. So we do trout, we do grayling. And
you do grayling, really?
Yep.
Wow.
And so every area, every drainage has, and I'm not a fish biologist, but every drainage has their species. Some go through different disease testing than others. That's all I can tell you, folks.
And you're stocking them for angling, correct? Or for
correct.
What are the reasons why you would?
Angling. We've always stocked them for angling because some of them naturally spawn, most of them don't. And I think the numbers, I don't even want to say the numbers. I think the natural spawning numbers are so low, they're almost negligible. And with our avid, angling community, we're just keeping those numbers up so people can have a recreation there. I can't even give you a number. Sorry. I didn't do my homework.
That's okay. Do fishing licenses help pay for the program?
Everything that you do for Parks and Wildlife, whether hunting licenses, fishing licenses, pay for us. We are not paid by taxes. That is probably the biggest question that I do get. So, yes.
Do you know? I know in California, I don't know if it's like this everywhere, but I do know that we're stopping a lot of the fish stocks in alpine lakes, particularly national parks. But I think generally speaking, that's a trend, or at least I feel like I've read that before. Is there any movement for that in Colorado? Have you heard anything about this, or is it still
I
going
haven't.
to take place?
I know there are a lot of questions on the real native lines, the genetics, and there is a lot of discussions on that. So I think for Colorado, there is such a strong community and recreation for it. Those discussions, to my knowledge, are not happening. So,
do you have any idea what the history? I mean, have these fish always been stocked by the air? I mean, obviously these are lakes that wouldn't normally have fish naturally. So do they used to do it in jeeps? I mean, I'm curious if there's such a long history of anglers going up there, like did they just learn one day that like planes were going to stock it and they started going up there, or has it been, have people always been like figuring out ways to get trout in these waters for way before you were doing like government sanctioned fish drops? Do you have any idea?
I don't know exactly when they started in Colorado Parks and Wildlife. I don't know the date. Originally, yes, jeeps, people, hiking.
Yeah,
that was.
It's amazing where
way.
fish will get. Like fish will get anywhere. I mean, it's astounding how they'll move. I mean, trout less so than like bass or something like that, but fish will find a way to get into that body of water somehow. It's weird.
But for high alpine lakes, we would, use people would hike up or use Jeeps, ATVs. And then there was, we started using helicopters too, which is pretty expensive. They're very expensive. But we've used fixed wing for many, many years. So I guess to finish off, to go back, when I go up and I fly into the cirque, many times between that morning flight on the mountains and when the fish are loaded up, the winds have changed, you know. And what's great is we have these dump lakes. So we have these big reservoirs where those fish are already going to be going to anyway. So we always have that option of dumping those fish into a bigger lake. But kind of back to the climbing sense, if you can kind of picture, I guess when you're flying into I'm trying to think of a good way to say this to your audience. When you're flying into a major airport, you're flying at 40,000 feet and you're going to be landing somewhere. There's step downs, right? There's certain altitude step downs to get to where you want to be. So for me, I'm looking at this cirque and each one has a different personality. Each one has, a really good in, a really good out. Maybe sometimes there isn't, depending on just the contours and the ridges. And so I'm looking at, from a three-dimensional space, these imaginary step downs to bring myself on a high level altitude down into that lake so that I'm about 150 feet over the lake where I can drop the fish. I do a lot of turns and I sort of really make sure that I know exactly where I want to be and what I want to be doing when I'm there, so that I'm really prepped for each specific step down. So I'm not just in the middle of the mountain sort of saying to myself, what am I doing here? There's a sort of really predetermined, because the further along you get closer to the lake, the less options you have. That's sort of your, and we still have options, right? There's always that sort of drainage. There's a sort of out. I did some gliding back in the day, just gliders, learning lift. And so learning where there's lift, upward moving winds and air in the mountains is also really important too. So knowing where there's drainage winds, knowing where there's lifting winds. And so I'm just at that point maneuvering to each step down. And as a pilot, I'm constantly thinking about what am I doing? What am I waiting for? And what am I going to do when I get there? Just constantly. What am I doing? What am I waiting for? What am I going to do when I get there? Because there's always something next to do. And if at any point during those step downs, I'm behind the game, I'm not on an airspeed that I like, I'm a little too high, maybe I'm a little too low, I'll just get out. You have to be you have to make that mark. It's a very specific mark on the way down. And there's no pressure, there's no pressure to continue.
There's not a bunch of fishermen at the lake waiting, demanding.
It's not a life or
They're
death
standing
situation.
there
Let's get these things down here. We see you buzzing around.
There's been times where there's a fisher person giving me away,
I'm
and
sure.
I'm like, oh man, I don't want to mess this one up.
Well, there's footage of you. There's footage of you in the movie fishing, right? Is that just for the movie, or do you get up there and fish a bit, or is that you?
So that's me, and that's my thing. I go up and I hike and I fish, and so that's.
So this is all basically self-serving.
I was just gonna say. So this is turning.
Hey, wait a minute.
You may do some double passes over some of them before
I
anybody
love
else
this lake.
knows. We're on to you, Denise.
Busted. No, I was 3 years in, and my coworker, actually, I was flying with him, and we were training, and we stalk over 400 lakes. And I was like, oh, it'd be so cool, because I hike anyway. I don't do the 14ers necessarily, but I hike a lot. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool if, I just went to all of these? And he looks over at me, because I was still pretty green then. He's like, yeah, why don't you do that? Why don't you hike to all of them?
So how far along are you?
Yeah.
So I'm like, I've been 7 years, and I've been to over 100, and I can say for certain I'm not going to make all of them. There's too many, There's just, and some of them, oh my gosh, some of them would take you 40 miles. To get to.
But you still stalk them. That's crazy. How many anglers could possibly visit those lakes? Those super remote ones. Yeah.
Yeah. People do in the Needles, just I mean, there's a lot of people in Colorado that are just going out there.
Yeah.
And yeah, but
Yay,
honestly,
Colorado.
the further away, the longer that you have to go, the better the fishing
Well, of course.
is, right? I
Yeah.
know. It's like that's where I've gotten my best ones. So that's what people ask me, like, what's your favorite lake? What's a good lake? I'm like, just the more you hike, over 15 miles, that's a good, yeah. That'll get
pretty
you
good
some good
guideline.
fish.
So
But,
there's a point in the movie where you talk about how you wanted to fly and how you became fascinated by it and determined. And you tell us that when you're in your late teens, I think 17 or 18, somewhere around there, that you took a flying lesson. And then you say, well, no, actually, you sort of stopping me. That's a lie. And so we're going to take a break right now. And when we come back, we're going to hear about that lie and understand more about your path to flight and what that looked like for you, because it's a pretty powerful story. All right. We will be right back to talk more with Denise Joi, Colorado Parks, Wildlife, Fish, and Other Critters pilot. You love adventure, we love adventure, and that is why we created Adventure Journal in print. It is the gift that we've made for ourselves and for our friends, and hopefully for you, that is analog, that gets away from screens, that gives you some of the most interesting, deepest, and thoughtful stories from some of the best writers and photographers working in the outdoor space. We do 4 a year. You get free shipping and a deep discount. It's $60 to have this absolutely beautiful, no batteries necessary celebration of adventure in your mailbox. Get it at adventure-journal.com. I am drinking, it's gotten cold now because we're halfway through the show. I am drinking Long Weekend Coffee. We launched Long Weekend Coffee earlier this year to bring you and us blends that are not fussy, that will take any kind of brew method that we like, whether it's at home, in a cabin, on the tailgate of a truck, doesn't matter. We have 4 blends. We have dark, medium, espresso roast, and a decaf. I think they're pretty amazing. I guarantee you will like them. Check us out at longweekend.coffee.
Hi, welcome back. While we were on our ad break, I got out my remote pilot certification from the FAA for flying drones, just to embarrass Justin, which led us on a little tangent about drones and flying low that I'll include now. I brought this out just to embarrass Justin.
What?
It's my 107, my drone.
Your drone?
Oh, yeah.
Congratulations.
So I still had to study the sectionals and learn about weather stuff, and it was a really fun process.
That's cool.
Super cool.
Yeah.
Congratulations. That's cool.
Thank you.
It's great having that. I know the Wright brothers are on there. It's kind of a cool piece of plastic.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
interesting.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's cool to have.
Imagine what they think
Yeah.
of drones. That's great.
I know, right?
Yeah.
This is true.
You have a lot of people flying drones in like problematic ways around. I don't know if it's mostly national parks or what the land is, but
I actually run into people more hiking because I'm really terrified of that as a pilot flying in the mountains, people flying drones that they shouldn't be. And there are people flying drones that they shouldn't be, especially in wilderness areas and other areas that, you're not allowed to. Gosh, and that's really hard. I'm that person like, hey, on the trail, like, do you have a permit for that? And I know they don't because it's impossible to get a permit.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, I have a permit. And I'm like, oh, really? Can you show me? I don't mean to be in it. Like, I haven't found a way to address it. But yeah, I mean, if you're flying and you hit one of those things, that's bad news.
Yeah,
I've flown over Colorado Springs and seen a quadcopter. And you just talk to approach, there's a towered airport there and you like give them a notification, but there's nothing they can really do. It's just like
Wow.
you make a notation of that. It's called a NOTAM.
because do you ever fly under 400 feet?
Yeah.
AGL?
So we fly, we usually fly 300 feet when we're doing our surveys across
Wow.
the landscape so we fly pretty low.
Wow. Okay.
Under that waiver. And then we fly a little bit. You have to identify the animal. So for pronghorn specifically, the females have 30% of females for pronghorn have horns. So you can't really just say like, oh, it's a male because it has, there's actually like a black patch they're looking for on the side of the animal. And so you have to fly them. And it's really challenging because you have to, one, be in an area where if I lose my engine, I am not disturbing anyone on the ground, whether that's like hurting, like, crashing into a fence, crashing into a person, a cow, right? So I have to think about me in a three-dimensional space. And then I have to think about these animals that are running 60 miles an hour. Where are they getting pushed right now? Am I pushing them in, to an area that's going to hurt them, into a gully, into a fence? Are they running towards a tower? So there's a lot of, high level situational awareness that you have to be cognizant of when you're flying low level for that kind of survey. That's a really hard survey that we do. So that way you can maneuver them and the aircraft. You have this animal running and you're maneuvering the aircraft next to them so the biologist can identify them. And that's tricky, because they don't always go where you want them to go.
Alrighty, welcome back. I know that you have all subscribed to AJ in that little interlude, and you've teed up your cart for long weekend coffee. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. You're a good citizen. And where we left off with Denise Joi, who is a pilot for Colorado Parks and Wildlife, we were talking about the film that she made with Gnarly Bay that profiles her and her career and how she flies and stocks lakes with fish and does wildlife surveys. And she was talking about how she came to be fascinated with flying and she was determined to be a pilot. And she starts to tell the story of she was about 17, 18 years old and took a lesson of some kind. And then she goes, actually, that's a lie. And this was spontaneous. And Denise is going to tell us sort of what's going on here and tell us when she actually did think about flying for the first time.
Thank you. I did lie. That was a really spontaneous answer. It was a long interview for Gnarly Bay. It was like, I think 2 hours. We took a break. But I've told that story to so many people that you just heard, that I was just 17 or 18 and I, always wanted to fly. And, because as a pilot, that's one of the first questions that people ask you, just why'd you want to start flying? And, you really can't tell everyone your truths all the time, but I think telling your truths are something really powerful in that. And at first, this film didn't want to share the real reasons, didn't really want to share my backstory. And I think when we talked earlier, just how that evolved to where I did want to share. I lied because I started flying. I started thinking about flying when I was really small. I was a child of abuse, and we had food insecurities and housing insecurities. And so for me, I would fantasize I was flying as an escape, And what's interesting is how through that process, like while that saved me in that time, like as a child, like while that was sort of a survival technique per se, it was also something that I chased as an adolescent and then a young adult and then an adult. What's interesting is how full circle it comes to when I started to fly. I realized quickly that I had these, the trauma that I needed to heal from. The high risk flying that I did and that I wanted to do, it takes a really healthy nervous system. And when you have adverse childhood experiences, which is any kind of traumatic, negative experience while your brain is being developed as a child, that shapes your nervous system, that shapes who you are. And a healthy nervous system, as we all know, is an elastic one that can go in and out of stress really easy, right? The parasympathetic, sympathetic. And so as I was really creating this user manual for my body and strengthening that, my nervous system, making it more flexible, healing from that childhood trauma. Later on, as I became a pilot, those tools were really helpful, because as I'm flying, and we talked about this a little bit, Stephen, just as I'm flying these operations, whether it's the waterfowl survey flights that we do, or the airdrops that we do for fish, you can't just be in a constant state of sympathetic. Like, that's just not sustainable, you know, and you can't just be in a constant cortisol rush. So, you know, for me to be able to do this day in and day out, really having this self-awareness on, so for example, for that waterfowl flights, it's a long flight. You have to be on your game for the whole day. And that's for a 4 to 5 hour stretch. So you're constantly in this, you know, fight or flight state of what if something happens now? And you really have to build this stamina, and realizing you're going into this for the long haul, like a marathon, like a race. And just being able to train your nervous system for that.
I suspect that a lot of people who are listening, well, when you and I first talked, one of the things that we touched on was just the sheer number or percentage of people that have had adverse childhood experiences. I would say most of the people that I know probably did, and we all deal with that, or not, I suppose, in one form or another. But for me, you know, the healthiest way was through adventure sports, adventure activities. And so I you know, we look at some of the world's best alpinists and sort of the darkness that they mine, or, you know, ultra running. And yeah, through hikers, like long distance through hikers, generally are not normal people. They're people who are seeking something. So, I mean, we're all seeking something, but I mean, you know, the kind of pushing that it takes for, you know, the kind of people that you read about, usually there's something impelling them forward. So I you know, I think that there's a commonality there. And certainly, I mean, you've chosen about as adventurous pursuit as you could possibly do, high risk, you know, high mountain flight. But so I think there's probably something that we can all take away from what you've learned about how you do your stress management. So, you know, maybe walk us through, if you will, the, you know, sympathetic, parasympathetic, those systems, fight or flight, the name of this movie about you, and kind of specifically how you manage that, and, you know, maybe through the backdrop of like these long survey flights that you do, where, you know, you're in the saddle for such an extended period of time, and the stress is always there.
I think just saying, like, just creating my own user manual for it, I didn't have really good mentors or role models. And so for me, creating a user manual for myself, and of course this journey was like 20 years ago. There's so much more amazing resources now on, you know, just that you can, on your fingertips, on your phone, or through reading, or through the internet. So this was back before smartphones. So I want to invite people that it's constantly being updated. Like, but I'm very interested anyway on when things don't work, why not, right? So I love physiological and physical stuff. So I guess when I first started flying, there's high altitude chamber. I don't know if you guys as climbers can ever go into a high altitude chamber. It sort of simulates what your body's like physiologically at 26,000 feet. Because everyone has a different first senses of oxygen deprivation, right? And so as a pilot flying, I have oxygen supplementation, but I fly high altitudes a lot. So what are my cues? My cues are going to be different than your cues. Similarly, physiologically, your cues for sympathetic are going to be different. Sympathetic and parasympathetic are going to be different than mine. So I was just really curious. I'm fascinated by it. So I'm just really curious what exactly happens, you know, like our adrenals, you know, coursing all these hormones, and our fight or flight, you know, capacity to bring us at the forefront of danger. What does that feel like in my body? And so once I realized what that felt like, you know, different physiological features, it's really easy for me to sort of train myself to go back into parasympathetic. So when I was a child, I had a really, I guess, narrow response to sympathetic because there was always danger. And for me, it was about stretching my window of tolerance, right? And that's what the plasticity comes from. That's where, like, training myself like you would a muscle on your arm. You're training your relationship to stress, because stress isn't a bad thing. I need stress in the airplane, and we all need stress when we're doing high adventure sports or flying in the mountains. Like, that's going to keep us aware. It's going to get the job done. Stress is bad when it shuts you down. So that's, I guess, where the line is on creating a healthy relationship and understanding on what stress feels like in your body and how it's reacting with yourself. Does that help kind of dive into those topics a little bit?
Yeah. So what is your embodied experience like on a long flight where you're doing waterfowl, you're over a river and it's hour upon hour? You know, how do you feel differently from when you climb in to when you climb out? And what's going through? What sort of things are you doing as you're flying? I mean, are you doing specific breathing exercises? Are you and how does all that affect decision making too? Like, what I'm kind of curious to sort of like be a doppelganger, get inside your brain, like from the time that you take off until the time you land on one of those long surveys.
I think a lot of it is, and also like my yoga teacher training really helped a lot too. Like putting your diaphragm on a map. Like, there's a lot of stuff right now there's a lot of awesome tools on elemental breathing, mindfulness, polyvagal techniques. Like, you know, the vagus nerve is a huge nerve. And so really concentrating on my diaphragm if I'm holding my breath, right? That's my biggest take. Like, that's my physiological factor. Like, during these moments of like quick stress, like, am I holding my breath? And we all feel surges of adrenaline. I think we all can know what that feels like. We can't just be constantly having surges of adrenaline all day. Like, that's not, I'll be too fatigued to land the airplane. So while I'm flying, I really am thinking about the whole flight. Like, as I'm doing these high risk operations and these flights, I'm going to have to go home and land the airplane. If it's gusting 20 knots, 30 knots, and it's really hot and the density altitude is really high and the aircraft isn't performing well, like, I have to have enough of my reserves. So while I'm doing these operations that are taking a lot out of me, I have to make sure that I'm going to be able to go home and land. So that's one thing that I am always thinking about, right? Because on a day-to-day basis, you know, it can be fatiguing and it can add up. And every day is going to be different depending on how well you slept, depending on all these other aspects, right? But so I kind of work my way from landing the plane backwards. How much energy do I have, right, for the whole mission? I'm not going to just deplete my whole glass of water and then be left with nothing when I land. Does that make sense? So a lot of it is understanding how much do I have, and then being able to sustain it. And a lot of that is like breath work in the plane, right? So creating a sort of a map on my diaphragm. How am I breathing? Concentrating on the exhales. That's a parasympathetic. That lowers the blood pressure, that lowers the heart rate, right? Quick inhales like increases your sympathetic. So different sort of meditations that you can do. Like, you know, I'm not closing my eyes and sitting on a pillow, but like just really keeping my energy focused for the flights that we do for the fish drops. It's really focused amount of energy for that drop. Like, once I get into that circ and I come out of the circ, I'm using a lot of that energy and a lot of my focus, and I'm definitely in a sympathetic state. Once I get out, I'm able to, it's almost like a HIIT workout, right? It's like really fast and then you can have like a kind of a period of recovering. You know, once I go through my flow and I'm climbing and I'm, you know, cooling the engine and I'm increasing altitude and I'm getting away from the mountains, like my body is like coming down really fast, you know, and I'm able to sort of sustain that energy a little bit longer than I would say like a waterfowl flight where I'm constantly on. So it's just about managing that energy and how you manage that throughout. And I feel like those techniques are really similar to techniques like you were mentioning earlier, like long distance runners or ultra runners or people that know, like, I have a 50-mile day today. I'm going to have this certain kind of pace. or a sprint runner. Like, I'm going to do 40 sprints today. I'm going to use this kind of pace. So you really change, for me, my physiology, and I prep my body for that stress to make it sustainable.
Yeah, it's just, as you were talking, I was just thinking about so many parallels within the outdoor adventure sport world. Like, you're talking about hit stuff. I mean, like, dropping into something steep on skis or surfing, you get these moments of very high intensity. I was also thinking too about when you said that you start with the landing and work backwards. And I think about how much time I've spent skiing in the backcountry and never really thought about it in those terms. Like, okay, let's work backward from our safe arrival at home. And there are very, you're going through that decision-making process. You're analyzing the snowpack. You're deciding whether you can ski something, whether you should ski something, all those things. And I don't know that people, I've done a lot of avalanche courses, and I don't know that thankfully there's been a much more focus on the human factor, without which you wouldn't have risk, but less so on maybe kind of almost like an engineered process, where you're taking all of these things into account. And I think how much safer and healthier that would be if you looked at it holistically the way you're talking. So.
I wish there was more of this in sort of outdoor, either endurance or sort of these big adrenaline sort of pursuits. This more of an awareness of how to manage these sorts of things. I mean, I was thinking about my approach to surfing dangerous waves or waves that are big out of my comfort zone. And when you were talking about working backward, I mean, I was thinking about that too, because that's part of the process. You think, okay, maybe I've never surfed here before, and I'm watching what the water's doing. How am I getting in? How am I getting out? Where is everybody else doing this? I have a clear path, so I kind of know what to expect. So I'm not just like throwing myself out there and then just immediately going, oh Jesus, like what's next? And maybe that happens. Often it does. It's out of your control, but at least you had sort of a plan going into it. But that's one thing, and that's something that a lot of surfers will talk about, or presumably backcountry skiers, or anybody that does something that's dangerous like this too. But that sort of navigating the mental throughout all of that is so crucial, and something that, at least in my experience, isn't really something that's focused on. I mean, like big wave surfers will talk often about breathing techniques to stay calm underwater, and that's super important. But yeah, it's like it feels like an untapped resource that the outdoor world could use a lot more of. Anybody who's putting themselves out there with risk, because having to make decisions, life or death decisions, while you're panicking is such a horrible experience. So it sounds like most of what you're doing is basically mitigating that throughout the flight. Yeah, it's a great tool. I wish we had more of it.
Thank you. I think I've got a lot of really positive feedback from pilots who, we are taught, and that's one thing in the movie, we're taught to, be physiologically safe to fly, like physically, mentally fit to fly, but they don't really teach how to do that, and I wish there was more emotional intelligence involved. And because we're operating an aircraft, but we are ourselves, a working organism too. And so, we have to make sure that, just like I think any other athlete, like we're prepared for the game. And a lot of that is holistic, more pilots are talking about it since COVID, mental health awareness, and which is huge, just tools that are, and I think too, like I was saying, just all the apps that are available now and everything online that's available now. There's a lot more resource for people. So you don't feel so alone in that journey. And,
well,
but
you sound uniquely self-aware of this and very articulate about it. Maybe a book is in your future.
Shoot. I would love to, navigate that. I'm writing my goal, actually, I reached out to Stephen, is to write some personal essays. And
well, there you go.
So I'm excited to see what that would look like.
Yeah, so am I. Well,
Fantastic.
I mean, there's, what he said and what you said. I mean, there's, you are very articulate in this, and there's, it seems like we're in the middle of a revolution of understanding, or maybe it's a bringing together understanding of different ways. My wife and I just laugh all the time about what time we go to bed. And I was so excited last week to read a story somewhere, Washington Post or Wall Street Journal or something, like the new thing with 20 somethings is going to bed at 9 o'clock. And people are, and a friend of mine was the manager of a big well-known rock band for like 2 decades. And he was so excited when they would come to play down here in Orange County because there was a noise curfew and he could be home in bed by 11 o'clock. But there's this understanding, I think, that's starting to percolate through the culture and through the sports culture too, about the importance of sleep, the critical importance of sleep. And I think that a lot of these things are being pulled together, but I haven't seen it pulled together like in the way that through the lens that you're talking about, where you're talking about like high risk, high stress, high physiological demand adventure, and the ways that you can manage that. It's being done through, I think, lifestyle. You're starting to see like the New York Times with their lifestyle covers, and you're seeing it through longevity, with podcasters like Andrew Huberman and Peter Attia, but you don't really see that coming into the outdoor adventure space. So yeah, I think there's a book contract in your future.
Well, thank you. But I will say there was a hiker that told me a story though. I might disagree with you. He was sharing a story on how, I think they were like that classic case. There was a guide and he was trying to bring someone up to Summit Denali and they were, 1,000 feet, 500 feet from the top. And he said, okay, we got to turn around now. We have weather coming in and, we'll make it to the top, but we're not going to get back down. And so I think the person who was hiring the guide was like, well, we're going to go up. And he said, well, I mean, you can, but I'm not, and just that, I think there are people in adventure who do think about going home. And I think, so I feel like there are people who in your
no, absolutely. No, I mean, we're turnaround times, a lot of this stuff is part of the vernacular, part of the wisdom. But I think that this broader, whether it's eating properly and sleeping properly and the right mindset. And I think that I just know so many people who are just basic natural athletes and really passionate about, pushing themselves. And it's not that they're not thoughtful, but I think that I do feel like we're on the verge of a broader understanding of these things and pulling these threads together in a way that I think will help us perform better and do it more safely and maybe feel better at the end of the day. So that's 100%. All good stuff.
100%. No, I agree with that. Because there's, and I think we have that mentality too in aviation. There is, I think, there's a lot of type A pilots and there's type A, I think, adventurers. And I love that we're having a more honest dialogue. A lot of people ask me, what makes the safest pilot or the best pilot? And, it's hard to encapsulate that in one word, but I always think of humility, right? Just like the humility to know, like, I'm here, I'm learning, and to try to do it better. And the mentors that I've gotten in my life have been so amazing on teaching me those skills, just new ways of looking at things, better ways of treating ourselves for the longevity. And because I think there is a burnout factor in our industry, my industry, and trying to make it sustainable. And taking care of yourself is huge on that. So,
well, in snow safety and avalanches, one of the best things that you can do is include a woman in your party. Backcountry skiers who have women in their group tend to be a little bit less goal oriented and more experience oriented, and much less likely to get caught in an avalanche. So I'm wondering if there's any extrapolation of that with female pilots too, if you see a difference in the way your female and male pilots approach the experience.
I mean, my first answer is yes, but I don't want to like typify or like, make a gender bias. But yeah, I mean, I am a very conservative pilot and I'm proud of that. And I'm always putting into questions on, can we do this? Can we do this safer? Can we do this differently? Do we have to do this today? And everyone talks about that. everyone talks about when they're in their car or when they're at home, you know, like, okay, we're gonna go home safe. That's our biggest priority. But when we're 500 feet from the summit, or we're just 200 feet more, and then we can have the biggest, you know, adventure of our life. Like, we're like, let's just push it. Let's just, come on, we're so close. And a lot of that has to do, I couldn't say. I feel like there was a study, this is interesting, actually, I didn't think of this. There was a study recently, and I'm not sure who shared this with me, that more female pilots, we end up making more like dents and bumps to like aircraft. Like, we call it hangar rash, like when you like, you know, something like really surface and like minor, like we have more of those accidents, but then the male pilots have more like life causing accidents. And someone told me about this research recently, and I wanted to dive more into it, because I was like, is that true? Like, is this, you know, like whenever anyone says about like, when anyone ever talks about a study, you're like, okay, is a study true? Where was it done and how was it done? But then like, but yeah, I am curious, you know, like, is that a feminine thing, right? It's more safety. I don't know, you know, for me, all my mentors, my biggest mentors are men, you know, and, there's a really classic saying, you know, there's a lot of bold pilots, there's a lot of old pilots, but there's not a lot of bold old pilots.
Such a good
and
saying.
So a lot of my mentors are, you know, old pilots who just, taught me some really good lessons. So
who are still around.
Yep.
Who are still around.
Well, on that note, we're going to bring this to a close. And, you know, I thank you so much, Denise. It's just been just so fascinating to listen to. I know we could talk all day. There's so many more questions that I have, but we should let our listeners go and get back to whatever important things that they have to do. So all of you who've stuck with us, thank you so much. I want to repeat again that you can see Fight or Flight on Vimeo. Search for Gnarly Bay. It's 14 minutes. It is just a beautiful film. The aerial photography is spectacular. You will see Denise Joi in her element. It's really cool, and it's a moving film. So, and the usuals. Thank you. Goodbye. We will catch you soon. You can follow us. You can like us. You can leave a review. That's all, folks. See ya.
Stephen, Justin, it was a pleasure. Thank you for having me on your podcast. It's a lot of fun.
Thanks so much, Denise. Really, really enjoyed it today. I'm going to be researching flight schools now.
Good. Good.